Hello. We are going to talk about accessibility in an open source community, but it's not any open source community. We're going to talk about accessibility in the processing community and about a project that we have been working on since 2016 ish. That is called the P5 Accessibility Project. I'm Luis, and this is Claire.
Howdy. Okay, so if you were around for the last processing community day, you've likely already heard about the origins of this project, which started out as a participatory design project between myself and a woman named Chancey Fleet, who's pictured on the far left of the screen. And Chancey is a blind assistive tech educator and advocate who, for her job every single year, has to plan a banquet. And the only tools that are available to her that are accessible currently are these tools like this wax-coated mesh that she can draw on and create these tactile spatial diagrams of floor plans. So we were working together on a touchscreen tonal application that would be accessible, work with her assistive technology. But in order for this project to be fully participatory, when it came time for her to roll up her sleeves and start programming, we found that most of the free learning resources and just sort of general resources around programming online were not accessible to her screen reader. And screen readers, for you that don't know, are a sort of non-visual interface between a computer and a person, generally people that are blind or have low vision, and they translate the computer's interface either to Braille. On the far left of the screen is a refreshable Braille display, or they also do speech synthesis, so they speak aloud the interface to users. So the resources online didn't pair well with this assistive technology and didn't translate the information on the screen very well. And that was true of learning resources that incorporated code snippets. Often those were pictures of code. Development environments and text editors that have special features like syntax highlighting didn't translate that information that's really important for code learners using screen readers. So we approached the Processing Foundation, who of course has this sort of mission to promote software literacy and make code learning accessible. And that, their mission worked really well with our sort of goal, which was to make processing more accessible to people that are blind or have low vision. All right, so in order to do this work, Chancey, was very new at programming, and we knew we needed to go to experts. So we formed an advisory committee with Josh Miele, Sina Baram, and Austin Serafin, all blind programmers that gave us great insights into the work that's kind of come before us, where some projects had pitfalls and where we can improve upon them. We had to develop a bunch of tactile learning tools, a curriculum, and software that made code learning more accessible. And to do that, we worked with fabulous educators and programmers to develop the tools that would support learning throughout a series of workshops that we've taught. So now we've done about 8, and we do like a mix of P5 and general web development. We've done workshops and 2 full courses in web development, one at the New York Public Library, and then another one brought us all the way to Gulu, Uganda to work with a tech camp that's out there with youth and young adults. Okay.
Okay. So when we started working on making P5 a little bit more accessible, Cassie was also starting to work on the editor. So we joined Cassie and we started thinking of how can we make the P5 editor have an accessible output that shows the canvas or displays the canvas in an accessible way. First, we started thinking about screen readers and how they match with browsers. And actually, that's something that changes every week almost. Sometimes the screen readers work well, and then the next day they don't. But usually, we recommend using JAWS, which is a paid screen reader, and Chrome and NVDA and Firefox. If you ever want to try using the editor with the screen reader, go ahead. So for the editor, we did several things. The first thing we did was work on accessible outputs. We all know the canvas, or those of us that have coded with P5 or processing know that the canvas is actually an array of pixels and that we cannot actually see or know what the shapes on the canvas are unless we are seeing it. So one of the things that we had to do was to piggyback on the code of any P5 sketch and get the arguments and the shapes from whatever users were writing, and then using that to create descriptions. We created a plain text description that reads out loud what the elements on the canvas are. We also created a tonal system that uses panning to indicate left to right movement or right to left movement, and it changes pitch to indicate top to bottom movements. And also a table of descriptions. Tables are super useful when you're using a screen reader because they allow you to know where a shape or an element is positioned spatially. So it's essentially a grid where you can navigate it with your keyboard and listen to what is in that space of the grid. We also implemented this high contrast theme for the editor, which is super helpful for people that have low vision and for programmers in general that prefer a high contrast editor. And we worked with Lauren on implementing web accessibility guidelines on the P5JS website. And we still have a lot of work to do. It's a work in progress. But one of the funny stories about this whole process was actually color names. Some of the HTML color names are tan. And when I tan in a different way than Claire. Another color name is cornflower blue, and another one is floral white. I didn't know what floral white is. And when screen readers read an HTML color name, it's very hard for the user to understand what that color name means. One of the web accessibility guidelines is that content shouldn't be readable, it should be understandable. So we actually developed an NPM module based of Crayola colors and testing with different people, and came up with a list of colors that are more user-friendly. And actually, Claire had really great results when testing that.
Yeah, the color namer was a really fabulous tool when we were teaching our workshops in P5 and web development. It's really helpful.
Yeah. But then we realized that this interceptor that we created for the editor was not enough. There are P5 sketches out everywhere, and especially in the P5JS website. And those didn't have the accessible outputs. So we moved from an interceptor into a library that can be plugged into any HTML file with a P5 sketch and produce the 3 outputs that we have as of now. We also started working on learning resources that guide users on how to use P5 with a screen reader, and created lesson plans that can be implemented for users that use screen readers. A funny thing about the whole project is that we started thinking first about making everything in the canvas accessible, but then the focus kind of changed into making basic shapes and basic structures accessible. That's perhaps because, as Dan says, P5 is great for making stuff, but it's fantastic for learning. So we focus more on the basic shapes that can allow people to learn the essential things about programming and coding. So what's next? Oh, there is a lot of work to do. Making learning resources more accessible is definitely something that we have to do. We realized last year that it's not only about making the canvas accessible, it's about the way that we write tutorials, it's about the way that we write lessons, and about the way that we write the documentation of P5. For example, just 2 little things. When we have a code example, it's usually better to say what the context is before putting a code snippet so that a screen reader user can know what they're about to hear before they actually hear it. And even when we use comments within code, it's better to put the comments before the actual lines of code in a different line, so that, again, there's kind of a sign that tells people what they're about to hear. The there is a lot of work in developing new learning materials that are actually focused for users that use screen readers. We definitely need to improve our descriptions, because when we have, for example, a smiley face on a canvas, the screen reader will read it as 3 or 4 ellipses, but it will not tell us what the relationship between those ellipses are and the shape that it makes. And we need to improve the IDE. Right now, we are using CodeMirror in the editor, and CodeMirror is not very accessible, but in 2019, CodeMirror will move towards accessibility, so that's a great thing that is happening. And we need to engage you. We need to engage teachers, software developers, and designers so that we can make the P5 community more interested in accessibility and more accessible to more people. When we were planning this talk, I was actually telling Claire that perhaps we didn't need an accessibility library. Perhaps the P5 library itself should include accessible outputs. But that's kind of a radical idea. And we also need you, the ones that are creating lessons, the ones that are creating tutorials, to consider accessibility when you do that. It's way better when we think about accessibility from the beginning than when we go and adapt something that already exists. So join us. Over the past year, people that we didn't know, because almost everyone that has worked on this project knows someone that knows us, but people that we didn't know just popped up on GitHub and decided to work with us. It's been a great learning experience for everyone, and just join us and talk to us and come to the session later today.